After 23 years of marriage, I watched my wife kiss another man at our friend's party. I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. I simply walked away. Everyone expected me to break down. Instead, I broke free. What happened next shocked even me, and destroyed everything she thought she knew about the quiet husband she'd underestimated for decades. My name is Eugene Doyle. I'm 48 years old, and for the past 15 years, I've built a reputation as one of the most trusted family archivists and genealogy consultants in New England. Ironic, isn't it? I've dedicated my career to preserving other families' legacies while my own was silently crumbling. When you spend decades with someone, you develop a sixth sense for when something's off. Like how Pamela suddenly started going to yoga 4 times a week instead of her usual 2. Or how she'd turn her phone face down whenever I entered our bedroom. Small things that your brain catalogs but your heart dismisses. You're being paranoid, Eugene, I told myself. This is Pam, the woman who nursed you through pneumonia 3 winters ago. The mother of your children. The one who's been beside you since you were practically kids yourselves. Our daughter, Rachel, noticed it too during her last visit home from college. Dad, is everything okay between you and Mom? She asked while helping me organize a client's Civil War-era photographs in my home office. Of course, honey. Why wouldn't it be? I replied without looking up from the acid-free sleeves I was carefully sliding the fragile photos into. I don't know. She seems different, distant, and she's always checking her phone. I brushed it off as our empty nest adjustment. Our son, Jason, had moved to Seattle for work last year, and Rachel was finishing her senior year at Boston University. For the first time in over 2 decades, Pam and I were alone in our colonial house in Concord, Massachusetts. That weekend, Tom and Barbara Sullivan invited us to their annual autumn dinner party. The Sullivans were our oldest friends. We'd known them since before the kids were born. Tom was my racquetball partner, and Barbara and Pam had served on the PDA together for years. Can you pick up my dress from the cleaners? Pam asked me that morning, hardly looking up from her coffee. The burgundy one. Burgundy? You never wear burgundy. I do now, she said, her voice carrying an edge I couldn't quite place. And I'll be getting my hair done at 3, so I'll meet you there. Those arrangements should have been another red flag. In 23 years of marriage, we'd never arrived at a social event separately. But when you've spent half your life with someone, you start filling in the blanks with trust instead of suspicion. That was my first mistake. I arrived at the Sullivans' Tudor-style home just after 7. The driveway was already lined with cars I recognized. The Hendersons' Volvo, Dr. Reed's Tesla, Judge Wilson's vintage Cadillac. Inside, conversations and laughter spilled from every corner as waitstaff circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres and wine. Eugene, Tom greeted me with a firm handshake. Where's Pamela? Meeting me here. Hair appointment, I explained, accepting a glass of scotch. I made my rounds, chatting with familiar faces about everything from property taxes to Judge Wilson's upcoming retirement. All the while, I kept glancing toward the entrance, waiting for Pamela to arrive. When she finally did, 40 minutes later, I nearly didn't recognize her. Her hair was different, not just styled, but lighter, with highlights I'd never seen before. The burgundy dress hugged her figure in a way that seemed meant for someone else's eyes. She scanned the room without noticing me, then made her way directly to the back patio doors. I excused myself from a conversation about the town's historical society budget and followed at a distance, curious rather than suspicious. That's when I saw him. Tall, silver-haired, with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention. He stood slightly apart from the main group on the patio, and when Pamela approached, his face transformed with a smile that wasn't meant for casual acquaintances. My wife leaned in close, too close, and he placed his hand on the small of her back with familiar ease. She laughed at something he said, her head tilting back in that way I hadn't seen in years. Then, as if they'd forgotten they were surrounded by 24 people, she kissed him. Not a greeting between friends, not a peck on the cheek. This was deliberate, intimate, the kind of kiss that comes with history. At a party, I saw my wife with another man. I didn't say a word, just walked away. The glass of scotch in my hand suddenly felt too heavy. I set it down on a side table, turned, and moved quietly through the crowd toward the front door. No one noticed me leave. Not even Tom, engaged in a heated debate about local politics. Not Barbara, busy refilling empty glasses. and certainly not Pamela, who was still on the patio, her attention fully captured by the silver-haired stranger. I drove aimlessly through the autumn-painted streets of Concord, passing landmarks that had been the backdrop of our marriage for decades. The elementary school where we'd attended Rachel's and Jason's performances, the park where we'd walked our now-deceased golden retriever, the coffee shop where we used to meet for lunch when Pamela worked part-time at the library. 23 years of memories, now cast in the shadow of a kiss. I returned home after midnight. The house was dark and silent. Her car wasn't in the driveway. I sat in our living room, surrounded by the antique furniture we'd collected over the years, and waited. Not planning what to say, not rehearsing accusations, just sitting in the quiet, letting reality settle into my bones. When dawn broke, I heard her key in the lock. She entered tentatively, still in that burgundy dress, heels in hand. The moment she saw me sitting there, her expression crumbled into panic. By morning, she was in tears, but I had already gone. I didn't disappear completely. That would have been too easy for her, too convenient. Instead, I became a ghost in my own life, observing from the periphery as Pamela scrambled to make sense of my silent departure. I checked into the old mill in about 20 minutes from our home, close enough to monitor the situation, far enough to maintain my distance. It was a strategic decision, not an emotional one. When you spend decades studying family histories, you learn that hasty reactions rarely yield the best outcomes. My first call was to our son, Jason. I didn't tell him about the kiss or my suspicions, just that his mother and I needed some space. "Dad, what's really going on?" he asked, his voice carrying the direct approach he'd inherited from me. "I need to figure some things out," I replied. "Trust me on this one, son." I contacted our financial advisor next. Hank Williams had managed our investments for 15 years and knew the intimate details of our retirement accounts, property holdings, and the business I'd built preserving other people's legacies. "I need to understand exactly where we stand," I explained over coffee at a diner far from my usual haunts. Discreetly, Hank nodded, his expression grim. "You thinking legal separation?" "I'm thinking information first, decision second." What I discovered wasn't surprising, but still stung. Pamela had opened a private bank account 3 months ago. She'd moved small sums, nothing suspicious to a casual observer, but a clear pattern to someone looking closely. Preparing a safety net, planning an exit. 2 days after the party, I drove to a vantage point near our house and watched. At 7:30 p.m., an unfamiliar black Audi pulled into our driveway. The silver-haired man from the party stepped out, looking comfortable, like he belonged there. No hesitation, no furtive glances, just the confidence of a man entering familiar territory. I didn't confront them. Instead, I set up my laptop at the inn and accessed our home security system, the one I'd installed after a break-in 2 years ago. The cameras covered the exterior entrances and the main living areas, not the bedrooms. I'd drawn that privacy line during installation, a decision I now found darkly ironic. From my digital vantage point, I watched them move through our home with the ease of practice. He poured himself a drink from my collection of rare bourbons, the 23-year Pappy Van Winkle that Jason had given me for my 45th birthday. Pamela leaned against him in the kitchen while preparing dinner, his hands moving over her with practiced familiarity. The sound was the worst part. Her laughter, bright, genuine, a sound I hadn't heard directed at me in years. "It feels strange without him hovering around," she said as they settled on the sofa, "but also freeing." "You think he knows?" the man asked, swirling my bourbon in my crystal tumbler. "Eugene, please. He spent so many years buried in other people's family trees, he can't see what's happening in his own house." Her voice carried a dismissive tone I'd never heard before. "He'll probably send a carefully worded email, asking to discuss things rationally." Her words struck deeper than any knife could. 23 years of marriage, reduced to contemptuous dismissal. But I didn't rage. I didn't break. I simply watched, gathering evidence, building my case with the same methodical precision I used when reconstructing centuries-old family connections. By morning, I had a complete picture, not just of her betrayal, but of her utter disregard for the life we'd built together. I wasn't raised to be vengeful. My father, a history professor at Boston College, taught me that dignity lies in measured responses, not emotional outbursts. But dignity doesn't mean surrender. It means fighting smart. My first move was purely financial. I contacted our bank and investment firms, requesting the addition of two-factor authentication on all our joint accounts. A reasonable security measure, given recent concerns about identity theft. I didn't freeze Pamela out. That would be legally problematic, but I ensured no major transactions could occur without my explicit approval. Next, I called Rachel at college. "Dad, what's really going on?" she asked immediately. "Mom called me crying last night, saying you've abandoned the family and might be having a mental health crisis." I kept my voice steady. "I'm perfectly sound of mind, Rachel. Ask yourself, if I were having a breakdown, would I have organized my client appointments to ensure no one's family history project gets delayed? Would I have arranged for Professor Martinez to cover my guest lecture series at the Historical Society?" The line went quiet for a moment. "No," she finally said. "You wouldn't. I can't explain everything now, but I promise you'll understand soon. Just don't make any judgments based solely on your mother's version of events." That evening, I drove to the office of Concord's most respected divorce attorney, Eleanor Bradford. I'd researched meticulously. She had an 89% success rate in high-asset divorces and was known for her surgical precision rather than scorched-earth tactics. "I don't want revenge," I explained, sliding a folder of printed screenshots and financial records across her desk. "I want protection for what I've built and dignity in how this ends." Eleanor reviewed the evidence with a professional detachment I appreciated. "Your documentation is impressive, Mr. Doyle. Most clients bring emotions. You've brought evidence." "Preserving history is my profession," I replied simply. I returned to the Old Mill Inn and enacted the next phase of my plan. I remotely backed up all our shared digital storage to secure servers only I could access. Family photos, holiday videos, the children's milestones. Not to deprive Pamela, but to ensure these treasures weren't casualties of whatever scorched earth she might create. The following morning, I visited our family doctor for a full physical and blood panel. Documentation that I was neither unstable nor in declining health, preempting any potential claims Pamela might fabricate. That afternoon, I received a text from an unknown number. "She's telling everyone you had a breakdown, that you've been acting strange for months, that she's worried about you." It was Barbara Sullivan. We'd never been particularly close, but she had a strong moral compass and apparently loyalty that extended beyond her friendship with Pamela. "Thank you," I texted back. Truth will prevail. I wasn't surprised by Pamela's strategy. Character assassination is the refuge of those who can't win on facts. But she'd forgotten something crucial about me. I'd spent decades helping families uncover truths buried under generations of carefully crafted fictions. I knew how to excavate reality from beneath layers of convenient lies. That night, I wrote emails to our extended family and closest friends. Not emotional appeals, but calm, factual accounts of my whereabouts and well-being. Not mentioning Pamela's infidelity or our separation. Simply addressing concerns some of you may have heard and assuring them I was taking some personal time to address important matters. I didn't slam doors. I didn't rage against betrayal. I methodically secured the foundations of my life, while Pamela was busy spinning narratives that would ultimately collapse under their own weight. By day 5 of my strategic withdrawal, the silver-haired man, whom I'd identified as Robert Cassidy, a pharmaceutical executive recently transferred to Pamela's company, was practically living in our home. But the fortress they thought they were occupying was already surrounded, not by armies, but by the quiet, inexorable force of consequences gathering on the horizon. A week into my strategic absence, I sent Pamela a package. No return address, delivered by courier rather than standard mail. Inside, printed screenshots of her lover's car in our driveway, timestamps clearly visible. A bank statement showing her secret account. A transcript of her dismissive comments about our marriage, captured by our home security system. And a handwritten note. "I'm not angry. I'm just finally seeing clearly. No threats. No demands. Just evidence that her carefully constructed narrative was built on sand." I watched the delivery through the security cameras I still controlled. Pamela accepted the package in her yoga clothes, probably assuming it was another online purchase. Her hands trembled as she opened it at the kitchen counter, the same counter where I'd made her breakfast every Sunday for 2 decades. The color drained from her face as she sifted through the contents. She frantically called someone. Robert, presumably, her gestures becoming increasingly agitated. This wasn't part of their script. They'd planned for tears, recriminations, perhaps even a messy confrontation they could spin to make me look unstable. They hadn't planned for silent, methodical documentation. That evening, my phone exploded with messages. Not from Pamela. She was still calculating her next move, but from our circle of friends. Barbara Sullivan called first. Eugene, I don't know what's happening with you and Pam, but people are saying things, troubling things. What kind of things, Barbara? I kept my voice neutral. That you've been controlling. That you've monitored her for years. That you're punishing her for trying to find happiness. She sounded uncomfortable, caught between decades of friendship and fresh accusations. Interesting perspective, I replied calmly. Have I ever struck you as controlling in the 20 years you've known me? No, she admitted. That's why this seems so out of character. Sometimes the simplest explanation is the correct one, Barbara. After we hung up, Judge Wilson called, then the Hendersons. Each conversation followed the same pattern. They'd heard troubling things, but couldn't reconcile them with the man they'd known for decades. I didn't correct them, didn't offer counter-narratives. I simply asked questions that made them reflect on their own experiences with me. The truth doesn't need aggressive defense when it's witnessed firsthand. That night, I drove to our neighborhood and parked a few houses down. Through her frantic damage control, Pamela had forgotten one crucial detail. Our bedroom curtains remained open, as they had every night since we moved in. From my vantage point, I could see her pacing, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing frantically. The fortress of lies was beginning to crumble from within, not from my assault, but from the weight of its own contradictions. By morning, Robert's Audi was gone. The first crack in their united front had appeared. 2 weeks after my departure, Pamela finally called. Not texted, called. A voice conversation leaves fewer tracks, creates fewer records. I answered on the 4th ring, giving myself time to center my thoughts. Eugene. Her voice carried practiced concern. We need to talk about what's happening. I agree, I replied, keeping my tone measured. Can you come home? Please. Whatever you think is going on, we can work through it. Notice the phrasing, whatever you think is going on. Not an acknowledgement, but a subtle suggestion that the problem existed in my perception rather than her actions. I'm not ready for that conversation yet, I said. When then? You can't just disappear after 23 years. A carefully modulated note of indignation entered her voice. The children are worried. Our friends are worried. I appreciate the concern. I maintained the calm that she once found comforting, but now clearly found infuriating. I'll reach out when I'm ready. The next day, I received a text from Rachel. Mom asked me to come home this weekend. Says you two are having serious issues. Should I? Yes, I replied. But keep your eyes open. Rachel had always been perceptive. As a child, she could spot the real culprit in playground disputes while teachers were still sorting through conflicting stories. Now, as a young woman, that perception had only sharpened. I knew exactly what Pamela was doing. The children would be her character witnesses, her emotional leverage. She was setting the stage for a confrontation with an audience guaranteed to make me hesitate, to soften my resolve. It was time to change the script. Friday afternoon, I contacted Jason in Seattle. Your sister's heading to the house this weekend. I think you should join her. Dad, what's really going on? His voice carried the direct approach he'd inherited from me. A performance is being prepared, I answered. I think both of you should be in the audience. Saturday morning, I watched through the security system as Rachel arrived. Pamela greeted her with a tearful embrace, already setting the emotional tone. 3 hours later, Jason's rental car pulled into the driveway, the unexpected variable in Pamela's carefully crafted scenario. I didn't intrude on their private conversations. Whatever narrative Pamela was spinning, I trusted my children's judgment. They knew me, not just the husband their mother described, but the father who taught them to evaluate evidence and think independently. Sunday evening, Rachel called. Dad, she said, her voice tight. I think you should know Mom's already talking to divorce attorneys. She's got this whole story about emotional neglect and how you've been cold for years. And what do you think? I asked, caring more about her perception than Pamela's accusations. A long pause. I think something doesn't add up. And I think her friend Robert seems awfully comfortable in our house. Trust your instincts, I told her. They've always been good. After we hung up, I made one final call to Eleanor Bradford, my attorney. They've started the narrative phase, I explained. Time to move forward. Affidavits are ready, she confirmed. And the financial protection measures are in place. Are you certain you want to proceed with the documentation package? I thought about the family photos on our mantle, the vows we'd spoken, the life we'd built, and the trust I'd extended. Yes, I said finally. No more shadows. It's time for light. The next morning, as Pamela prepared to drive our children to the airport, a courier delivered Eleanor's package to our home. Comprehensive documentation of the affair, the financial maneuvers, and the disparaging comments. No emotional accusations, just facts. Truth doesn't need embellishment to cut through deception. 3 weeks after my departure, I returned to our home. Not to reconcile, not to argue, to reclaim my space and face the situation head on. A man doesn't abandon the field permanently, especially when he holds a high ground. I arrived mid-morning on a Tuesday, when I knew Pamela would be home between her yoga class and lunch with her friends. I used my key, entering quietly, but making no attempt to surprise her. She was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone, when she heard my footsteps. The coffee mug slipped from her hand, shattering on the tile floor we'd installed together a decade ago. Eugene. Her voice wavered between shock and attempted control. Pamela. I set my briefcase on the counter and began brewing coffee as if it were any ordinary day. We need to talk. Her eyes darted at her phone, then back to me. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. I know. I poured water into the machine, my movements deliberate. I wasn't ready then. I am now. This isn't like you, just disappearing, she began, shifting into the narrative she'd been crafting. Stop. The word wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. That story might work with others, but not with me. Not anymore. I placed a folder on the counter between us. Inside were divorce papers, already prepared by Eleanor, alongside printouts of the most damning evidence. This isn't a negotiation, I explained calmly. It's a notification. Her face cycled through emotions, shock, anger, calculation, and finally, a kind of grudging respect. How long have you known? She asked quietly. Long enough. I didn't elaborate. The details weren't important anymore. She picked up the divorce papers, scanning the terms. Her eyes widened to the financial arrangements. Fair but firm, with no room for manipulation. The children already know, I added. Not everything, but enough. They've seen the evidence themselves. That was the moment her carefully constructed facade truly collapsed. Pamela had always prioritized her image as a mother above all else. You had no right, she whispered, but the words lacked conviction. You made choices, I replied simply. So did I. Before I closed my office door, I turned back. I'm moving forward, Pamela. You should too, just not in this house. It wasn't cruelty. It was clarity, the kind that comes from recognizing when a chapter has truly ended. A week after returning home, I encountered Robert Cassidy face to face. It wasn't planned, at least not by him. I was leaving Concord Public Library after researching a client's Revolutionary War-era ancestors when I spotted his Audi in the parking lot of the upscale cafe across the street. Some confrontations are necessary, not for drama, but for closure. I entered the cafe calmly, spotted him at a corner table reviewing documents, and approached with deliberate steps. He didn't notice me until I pulled out the chair opposite him. Mr. Cassidy, I said evenly, sitting down, I think it's time we met properly. His eyes widened in recognition, darting toward the exit before settling back on me. Eugene Doyle. The same. I placed my hands on the table. Nothing hidden, nothing threatening, just a man claiming his rightful space. I thought we should have a conversation. Look, this is awkward, he began, his corporate polish already assembling excuses. Whatever Pamela told you about us. She hasn't told me anything, I interrupted calmly, which is precisely the problem. His confusion was genuine. Clearly, Pamela had assured him I remained ignorant or had accepted whatever narrative she constructed. I'm not here to create a scene, I continued. I'm here to look you in the eye and ask if you understand what you participated in destroying. He shifted uncomfortably. Marriages end. People grow apart. Indeed they do, I agreed. But honorable people end one relationship before beginning another. His eyes dropped to his coffee cup. The silence stretched between us. 23 years, I finally said. 2 children. A life built brick by brick. That deserved more than a kiss at a party and lies in the aftermath. His head snapped up. She said you knew for months. That you were separated in all but name. I smiled thinly. Consider who provided that information and their potential motives. Understanding washed over his face, followed by something resembling shame. Not guilt over the affair, but embarrassment at being manipulated, the kind of embarrassment corporate executives find intolerable. The divorce will proceed, I said, standing. I don't expect apologies or explanations. I simply wanted you to see the human being you helped betray, not some abstract obstacle in your path. As I turned to leave, he called after me. Doyle, for what it's worth, she's losing the narrative at the company. People are asking questions. I nodded once, acknowledgement without gratitude, and walked out into the autumn air. Some victories aren't about winning, but about making sure everyone recognizes what's been lost. 6 months after finding Pamela with Robert, our divorce proceedings were nearly complete. The house was on the market, assets divided according to Eleanor's meticulous planning. We communicated only through attorneys, arrangement that maintained peace and clarity. Then Pamela requested a face-to-face meeting. No lawyers, no mediators. Just the 2 of us at the small Italian restaurant where we'd celebrated our 20th anniversary. I considered refusing. What remained to discuss? But closure sometimes requires one final conversation, so I agreed. She arrived 15 minutes late, a habit that once irritated me but now seemed trivial. She'd aged in these 6 months, fine lines around her eyes deeper than I remembered. Thank you for coming, she began after ordering a glass of wine. I wasn't sure you would. We were married for 23 years, I replied. That deserves at least one final conversation. She nodded, fingers tracing condensation on her water glass. The house sold quickly. Good neighborhood, good schools. It always would. The small talk exhausted itself quickly, leaving the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. Eugene, she finally said, I need to know if you can ever forgive me. I considered the question carefully. Not a reflexive response, but a truthful one. Forgiveness isn't the issue, I answered. I've moved beyond anger. What I can't do is forget. I never meant to. Please, I interrupted gently. No narratives. Not anymore. She bit her lip, an old habit from when she was genuinely uncertain, not performing uncertainty. Robert's gone, she offered. He left when the pharmaceutical company transferred him to Chicago. I nodded, unsurprised. Robert had struck me as a man who followed paths of least resistance. Are you seeing anyone? She asked, her tone suggesting she'd been gathering courage to ask. No, I answered truthfully. I'm relearning who I am without you. Something in her expression crumbled, perhaps the last vestige of hope that I'd been destroyed by her departure, that I needed her to be whole. The children miss you, she said. Jason says you're taking him fishing in Alaska this summer. We leave in 3 weeks. Rachel's joining us for the second half. The conversation drifted to safer topics, the children's accomplishments, mutual friends, her new apartment downtown. As we finished dessert, she reached across the table, hand stopping just short of mine. I made a terrible mistake, she said, eyes glistening. If I could go back. We can't, I interrupted gently. And that's all right. I paid the bill and walked her to her car. No dramatic embraces, no tearful reconciliations, just 2 people acknowledging the end of a shared journey. As I drove home, I realized the heaviness in my chest had lightened. Not disappeared, but transformed into something manageable. Not healing, exactly, but the beginning of whatever comes after. 1 year after seeing Pamela kiss another man at the Sullivans' party, I stood on the shore of a small lake in Vermont, watching the sunrise paint the water copper and gold. The cabin I'd purchased was nothing grand. 2 bedrooms, an open kitchen, and a wraparound porch perfect for morning coffee and evening contemplation. The past year had been a journey of deconstruction and rebuilding. The divorce had finalized without drama. the household to a young family expecting their first child, and my business had expanded to include digital archiving services for historical societies throughout New England. My phone buzzed with a text from Jason. "Happy 49th birthday, Dad. Call when you wake up." I smiled, making a mental note to call both children later. They'd emerged from the divorce with remarkable resilience, perhaps because I'd never used them as weapons or forced them to choose sides. On the small desk inside, my laptop displayed a half-completed family tree for the Petersons from Brattleboro, 6 generations of farmers, teachers, and local politicians who'd helped shape Vermont's history. Their story waited patiently for my expertise to bring it to life. But today was for reflection. I walked along the shoreline, hands in pockets, considering the journey that had brought me here. The pain had faded gradually, like an old photograph losing contrast with time. What remained wasn't bitterness, but perspective, an understanding that even decades-long commitments required constant tending from both parties. My brother David arrived that afternoon, as promised, carrying fishing gear and a bottle of scotch. At 61, he'd weathered his own divorce 15 years earlier and emerged stronger for it. "How's it feel being on the other side?" he asked as we settled into Adirondack chairs on the porch. "Like waking up," I replied. "Everything's clearer." We talked as the day faded, not just about Pamela in the past, but about my plans for expanding the business, his upcoming retirement, the fishing trip we'd promised ourselves for decades. "You know what surprised me most?" I said as stars appeared above the pines. "Not the betrayal, but how I handled it. I never knew I had that kind of strength." David nodded, understanding what I meant. Not pride in stonewalling or calculating revenge, but in maintaining dignity through devastation. "Some men never find that out about themselves," he observed. "Takes a storm to see what's built to last." He was right. The man who had walked out of that party a year ago wasn't the same one sitting here now, not diminished, but distilled. Stronger, clearer, more authentically himself. As night settled fully around us, I realized I'd stopped looking backward. The archived memories, both good and painful, had been properly cataloged and filed away, leaving space for whatever came next. Not a second chance or a new beginning, exactly, just the next authentic chapter in a life still very much worth living, written on my own terms.